I knew something was wrong the moment my pregnant wife smiled while signing the paper that was supposed to erase me. Not a nervous smile. Not the kind a person wears when they are making a hard choice. It was calm, polished, almost proud, like she had been practicing it in the mirror for weeks. The conference room on the 32nd floor of Whitmore Manufacturing was so quiet I could hear the silver pin scratch across the final page. Outside the glass walls, downtown Dallas shimmered in the late afternoon heat, all steel, sunlight, and expensive reflections. Inside, 12 people watched my marriage become a business transaction. Ashley sat across from me in a cream-colored dress, one hand resting on her 7-month belly, the other guiding that pin like she was signing a victory. Her father, Robert Whitmore, stood near the head of the table with his arms folded and that same old smile on his face, the one that had told me for 5 years I was tolerated, not welcomed. 2 company attorneys sat beside him. 3 board members pretended not to stare. Her mother dabbed at perfectly dry eyes with a folded tissue. Everyone had come to witness the quiet husband finally being put in his place. The document was called a post-nuptial clarification agreement, a neat little phrase built to hide an ugly purpose. It separated assets, protected family holdings, limited future claims, and, according to Ashley, made everything cleaner before the baby arrived. Cleaner. That was the word she used when she handed me the draft a week earlier at our kitchen island, right beside the half-finished nursery catalog and a cup of tea gone cold. She said we needed stability. She said her father was worried. She said a child should not be born into uncertainty. What she meant was simple. Sign away any leverage, Michael. Step aside. Stay useful, but stay small. Now, in front of everyone, she finished her signature with a little flourish and placed the pen down gently, almost lovingly. Then she looked at me, blue eyes steady, chin raised just enough for the room to notice. Now you finally understand your place, she said. Nobody laughed loudly. People like the Whitmores rarely did. They smiled instead. Robert's mouth twitched. One of the attorneys looked down at his papers. Her mother exhaled like justice had been served. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't reach for the pen. I didn't give them the scene they had dressed up to watch. I just looked at Ashley's signature drying on the page and felt something inside me go still. Not broken. Not angry. Still. There is a difference. A man can spend years being underestimated until the insult stops hurting and starts becoming useful. I had learned that in rooms like this, surrounded by people who mistook silence for weakness because silence had never cost them anything. Ashley leaned back, her hand still on her belly, waiting for me to shrink. Robert cleared his throat and said, Michael, this is best for everyone, especially the child. That was when I finally looked up. The sunlight hit the table between us, turning the polished wood into a long golden blade. I could see my reflection in it, calm face, tired eyes, navy suit, wedding ring still on my hand. I thought about the years I spent swallowing little humiliations at Whitmore dinners. The jokes about my background. The way Ashley used to squeeze my knee under the table, silently asking me not to make trouble. The way she eventually stopped squeezing my knee and started smiling along with them. I thought about the first ultrasound photo still taped to our refrigerator at home, a tiny gray shape that had once made me believe our marriage might find its way back. And then I looked at the paper again. Her signature was perfect, exactly where it needed to be. I gave a small nod, almost to myself, and said, Actually, Ashley, that signature was the last one I needed. The room changed before anyone spoke. It was subtle at first. A blink from one attorney. A shift in Robert's shoulders. Ashley's smile held for half a second too long, then tightened at the edges. What is that supposed to mean? She asked. I didn't answer right away. I turned my wrist and checked my watch. 4:59 p.m. 1 minute before the close of business. 1 minute before the final transfer became active. 1 minute before the Whitmore name stopped owning the room it had used to humiliate me. I reached down beside my chair, lifted a dark blue folder from my briefcase, and laid it on the table without opening it. The sound was soft, barely more than paper touching wood, but every eye in that room moved to it. Robert's smile disappeared first. Ashley followed the movement of his face, and for the first time all afternoon, I saw uncertainty pass through hers. I rested my hand on the folder and kept my voice even. I think we should wait 60 seconds before anyone else explains my place. For the next 10 seconds, nobody moved. The conference room seemed to forget how to breathe. The air conditioning hummed softly above us, pushing cold air across a table full of people who had arrived expecting a clean little family performance. Ashley stared at the blue folder like it had appeared out of nowhere. Robert looked at it longer than he should have, and that was the first crack. Men like Robert Whitmore did not fear arguments. They feared paperwork they had not approved. I watched his eyes narrow, then slide toward the senior attorney beside him, a gray-haired man named Preston Vale who had been billing the Whitmore family since Ashley was in braces. Preston did not touch the folder. He only adjusted his glasses and waited for Robert to speak first. That told me plenty. Ashley gave a small laugh, soft and controlled, the kind she used at fundraisers when someone made a joke she did not like. "Michael, this is not the time for theatrics," she said. Her voice was smooth, but her hand shifted on top of her belly. Not protectively, restlessly. "You already agreed to be reasonable." Reasonable. That word had followed me around the Whitmore family like a leash. Be reasonable when Robert moved our wedding reception to his country club because my family's church hall was too modest. Be reasonable when Ashley's mother rewrote the guest list and cut half my cousins from Oklahoma. Be reasonable when Robert introduced me at Christmas as Ashley's husband, the numbers guy, because he could not remember, or did not care, that I had built my own consulting firm before I ever met his daughter. I had been reasonable for years, quiet enough to keep the peace, patient enough to look weak, useful enough to stay invited. I looked at the wall clock. For 59 and 22 seconds. Robert finally stepped forward. "Open it, then," he said, but his tone had changed. It still carried authority, but now authority had a hairline fracture running through it. I smiled faintly, not because I was enjoying this, but because I had waited 6 months to hear fear try to dress itself as command. "In a moment," I said. "The timing matters." One of the younger board members, a man in a charcoal suit who had avoided eye contact all afternoon, leaned back from the table as if distance might protect him from whatever was inside that folder. Ashley noticed. Her eyes moved from him to me, then to her father. "Dad," she asked. Just one word. That was all it took to show the room she was not as certain as she had pretended to be. Robert ignored her. His attention stayed locked on me. "You are in my building, Michael." I let that sentence settle. My building. He said it with the confidence of a man who had spent 3 decades hearing people agree with him before he finished speaking. I looked around the room slowly. The framed photo of the original Whitmore factory in Fort Worth. The glass award case by the door. The walnut table he had imported from North Carolina because he believed expensive would make decisions feel permanent. Everything in that room had been arranged to remind people who held power. That was the funny thing about rooms like this. They could lie for years and still look honest. "I know where I am," I said. "That is why I came." Preston Vale's face changed then. Not much. Just a small tightening near the mouth. He had understood something before the others did. Good attorneys listen to tone before facts. He heard mine and knew I had not come to beg. The second hand on the clock moved again. For 59 and 41 seconds. Ashley straightened in her chair. "This is embarrassing," she said, quieter now. "For you." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for one painful second I saw the woman I married before the Whitmore name swallowed her whole. The woman who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during late flights, who once cried. Because I remembered her favorite diner outside Austin, who told me she wanted a life that felt real instead of impressive. I missed that woman. But I had stopped confusing missing someone with trusting them. The clock clicked. For 59 and 53 seconds. Robert reached for the folder. I placed 2 fingers on top of it and stopped him without raising my hand from the table. Not yet. His face flushed, but he pulled back because every witness in the room was watching. 7 seconds. 6. 5. Ashley whispered my name, and for the first time that day, it did not sound like an accusation. 4. 3. 2. 1. The clock struck 5 o'clock. My phone vibrated once against the table. One clean buzz. No drama. No speech. Just confirmation. I opened the folder, turned the first page toward Preston Vale, and said, "Now we can talk." Preston Vale read the first page without moving anything except his eyes. That was how I knew the document was doing its job. Loud people react with their hands. Careful people react with silence. His face lost a little color under the conference room lights, and the change was small enough that most of the room missed it. Robert did not. Ashley did not either. Her chair made a faint sound against the carpet as she sat straighter, her polished smile finally gone. "Preston," Robert said, "what is it?" Preston did not answer right away. He turned the page slowly, then the next, then looked at the confirmation stamp at the bottom. His thumb rested near the signature block, and I watched him recognize the names, the dates, the corporate seal, the transfer language, all the little pieces of a truth that had taken me half a year to assemble. "This appears to be a controlling interest schedule," he said carefully. Robert laughed once, but it came out dry. "That is impossible." I almost felt sorry for him in that moment. Not because he had been kind to me. He had not. Not because he deserved mercy. Maybe he did. Maybe he did not. I felt sorry because I knew what it was like to believe a life was solid right before the floor started moving. Mine had moved slowly. His was moving all at once. Preston looked at me. "May I ask how you obtained this?" "Legally," I said. "Through Meridian Harbor Capital." The name landed in the room like a key turning in a lock. One of the board members whispered something under his breath. Robert's eyes widened just enough to tell me he knew the firm. He should have. Meridian Harbor had purchased the manufacturing debt Whitmore failed to restructure in January. Meridian Harbor had acquired voting rights from two retired shareholders Robert had ignored for years. Meridian Harbor had quietly funded the supplier settlement Robert thought was being handled by a friendly lender in Chicago. What Robert did not know until that moment was that Meridian Harbor was mine. Not by vanity. Not by ego. By necessity. I built it 7 years earlier under a holding structure because I learned young that rich men respect money more when they cannot see the person behind it. Ashley turned toward me, her voice lower now. "Michael, what did you do?" That question pulled me back years before the glass office, before the blue folder, before her signature dried on paper she barely understood. I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in a split-level house with a loud furnace and a driveway that cracked every winter. My father sold insurance. My mother taught 3rd grade. Nobody in my family had buildings named after them. Nobody held board seats. Nobody donated enough to get their picture on a hospital wall. We measured success in paid bills, working cars, and the relief of making it to Friday without borrowing from Monday. I was good with numbers early, not because numbers made me feel smart, but because numbers were honest. A dollar was a dollar. Debt was debt. Interest did not care about excuses. By 32, I had built a consulting practice that helped distressed companies survive bad decisions made by men who wore better suits than mine. I did not chase attention. I chased patterns. Bad loans. Hidden liabilities. Inflated valuations. Proud owners who believed a family name could hold up a balance sheet. That was how I first understood the Whitmores, long before I married into them. They did not build power. They inherited the appearance of it. When Ashley and I met at a charity dinner in Austin, she did not seem like them. She laughed at the wrong jokes. She took off her heels under the table because they hurt. She asked me what I did, and when I told her, she actually listened. For a while, I believed she saw me. Not my resume. Not my bank accounts. Me. Maybe she did. Maybe people can see you clearly and still choose the mirror later. Preston turned another page, and the room came back into focus. Robert's breathing had changed. Ashley's hand rested on the edge of the table now, no longer on her belly. I slid the second document forward. "That is the acquisition summary," I said. "The next page explains why your father no longer controls this company." Robert stared at the acquisition summary like the words had been printed in a language he had never needed to learn. For 30 years, people had explained problems to him gently. Bankers softened warnings. Accountants buried bad news on page 12. Employees called disasters temporary pressure. Even Ashley had learned to speak around him, never through him, because Robert Whitmore did not like being corrected in rooms where people could witness it. Preston Vale turned the page again, slower this time, and I saw the exact second he stopped being the family attorney and became an attorney reading evidence. That difference mattered. "The voting rights transferred at close," Preston said. His voice was careful, almost flat. "The debt instruments convert under default provisions. If these filings are accepted, and the confirmation notice suggests they were, then Meridian Harbor holds effective control." Robert's jaw tightened. "Effective control is not ownership." "No," I said. "But the next page is." Ashley turned toward me as if I had stepped out from behind a wall she never knew existed. "You bought shares from our shareholders?" she asked. "Our shareholders." Even then, she said it like I was standing outside the fence. I looked at her for a moment. and the memory came before I could stop it. 3 years earlier, we were at Robert's lake house near Cedar Creek, sitting through one of those Sunday lunches where money floated through the air without anybody admitting they worshipped it. Ashley wore a white sweater, sunlight in her hair, and I remember thinking she looked peaceful. Robert was telling a story about a supplier he had crushed in negotiations, how the man finally learned where he stood. Everyone laughed. I did not. Ashley noticed and kicked my shoe gently under the table. Later, in the kitchen, she whispered, "Please do not make Dad feel judged. Not, please do not let him disrespect people. Not, you were right to be uncomfortable. Just do not make Dad feel judged." That was the first time I saw the shape of the road ahead, but I loved her enough to call it a shadow. After that, the little things arrived like dust under a door. At holiday dinners, Robert asked me about my little consulting projects in front of men who owed my firm more money than their watches cost. Ashley smiled tightly, then changed the subject. At a hospital fundraiser, her mother introduced me to a donor as Ashley's quiet husband, and Ashley laughed like it was harmless. When I told her later that it bothered me, she sighed and said, "They are old-fashioned, Michael. Do not take everything so personally." That sentence aged badly in our marriage. "Do not take it personally" became the family motto whenever I was the one being minimized. When Ashley became pregnant, I thought the baby would pull us back towards something honest. I painted the nursery myself in a soft pale green because she said yellow felt too loud. I spent a Saturday assembling the crib, reading every instruction twice, making sure every screw sat flush because I wanted one thing in that house to feel secure. Ashley stood in the doorway for a while, one hand on her belly, watching me work. For a few minutes, I thought we were still us. Then her phone buzzed. She looked down, smiled at a message from her father, and said, "Dad wants to make sure everything is protected before the baby comes." Everything. Not everyone. I should have heard it then. Protection became meetings I was not invited to. Family planning became asset planning. Her pregnancy became less a shared miracle and more a corporate deadline. She started saying the Whitmore legacy mattered. She said our child needed a clean future. She said her father only wanted to prevent confusion. But confusion was never the problem. Control was. Back in the conference room, Ashley's eyes were glossy now, not with sadness, but with the shock of a person discovering the locked door had been opened behind her all along. "You let me sign that agreement," she said. I kept my voice low. "You asked me to sign away claims to protect your family holdings. I declined. You signed away yours to prove a point." Preston looked down at the page again, and this time he did not correct me. Robert gripped the back of his chair. "You planned this," he said. I thought of every dinner where I had been quiet, every insult folded and stored, every balance sheet I had read after midnight, while Ashley slept beside me like we still trusted each other. "No, Robert," I said. "You planned this. I just read the documents you never thought I was smart enough to understand." The silence after my words did more damage than anger could have. Robert's face hardened, but his eyes kept falling back to the documents, as if the paper itself might apologize and change its mind. Ashley looked between us, searching for the version of her father she had trusted her whole life. The man who could fix a problem with one phone call, one lunch at the club, one quiet favor from someone who owed him. But that man had been living on borrowed time and borrowed money. The first real sign came 6 months earlier, on a Thursday night in March, when I found Robert alone in our driveway under a cold Dallas rain. He was sitting in his black Lincoln Navigator with the engine running, headlights pointed at our garage door, phone pressed to his ear. I had just come home from a client dinner, tie loose, shoulders tired, thinking about paint samples for the nursery. He did not see me at first. The rain softened everything, the streetlights, the windshield, even his voice. But I heard enough. He said the line of credit could not freeze before the quarter closed. He said the supplier lawsuit had to disappear. Then he said something I never forgot. "If the board sees the covenant breach, I am finished." Finished. Not pressured. Not delayed. Finished. When I walked past his window, he ended the call so fast his hand almost slipped. He rolled the glass down 2 inches and gave me that country club smile. "Michael." Late night. I looked at the rain sliding down the door. "Same as you, I guess." He did not like that. Men like Robert prefer questions they can answer downward. The next morning, curiosity became discipline. I pulled public filings, supplier liens, court records, Uniform commercial code statements. Every dry little document nobody reads unless they already smell smoke. By noon, I knew Whitmore Manufacturing was not just struggling. It was hollow. The company owed more than Robert admitted. 2 equipment loans were cross-collateralized. A private credit fund had quietly taken first position on several assets. Payroll had been covered twice through emergency advances. Their biggest contract in Oklahoma City was 39 days behind schedule, and the penalty clause was ugly. From the outside, Whitmore still looked like polished brass and family legacy. Inside, it was a building with termites in every beam. I did not tell Ashley right away. That is the part people judge until they live it. I wanted to believe there was an explanation. I wanted my wife to sit with me at the kitchen table, lower her voice, and say, "Michael, I am scared. My dad is in trouble." I would have helped. Quietly. Fairly. I had saved companies in worse shape. But that conversation never came. Instead, Ashley became colder. She took calls in the nursery with the door half closed. She stopped leaving her laptop open. She began using phrases that did not sound like her. Marital exposure. Legacy protection. Separate property clarification. I heard Robert's voice inside her sentences. I heard Preston's legal caution underneath her concern. And every time I asked what was going on, she touched her belly and said, "I just need to feel safe." Safe. That word was supposed to end the discussion. It almost did. One Saturday morning, while I was installing blackout curtains in the nursery, she stood behind me and said her father thought we should meet with family council. Not our council. Family council. I kept tightening the bracket into the wall and asked, "Why?" She said it was responsible. She said successful families plan ahead. Then she added, soft enough to pretend it was not cruel, "You would understand if you came from this kind of structure." I remember the screw pausing halfway into the drywall. The room smelled like fresh paint and new wood. A tiny stuffed elephant sat on the dresser. Our child's room was becoming a place where her family's money could insult mine. That was the day I stopped waiting for honesty and started protecting myself. I did not move loudly. I did not threaten divorce. I did not demand answers she had already chosen not to give. I called a banker in Charlotte who owed me a favor. I called a retired shareholder named Helen Barlow, whose husband had helped Robert's father expand the first plant in Fort Worth. Robert had ignored Helen for years except when he needed her vote. I listened to her talk for 40 minutes about being treated like a relic. Then I made her a clean offer at a fair price. She cried before she accepted, not because of the money, but because someone had finally called her by her name. 1 call became 6. 6 became a structure. Debt first. Voting rights second. Minority shares third. Supplier settlements fourth. By the time Ashley slid that agreement across our kitchen island, believing she was cornering me, I already knew the corner was behind her. Back in the conference room, Preston reached the debt schedule and stopped. Robert saw it too. His lips parted, but no sound came out. I leaned back slightly and looked at the man who had spent years measuring my worth by how quietly I sat at his table. "Your company did not collapse today," I said. "Today is just the first day you were forced to admit who caught it." The truth did not arrive in that room like thunder. It arrived like an accountant closing a ledger. Page by page. Clause by clause. Signature by signature. Preston Vale kept reading, and with every line, Robert Whitmore looked less like a chairman and more like a man watching the lights go out in a house he thought he owned. Ashley had gone quiet beside him. That quiet hurt more than her earlier pride, because I knew what lived inside it. Not regret. Calculation. She was trying to understand which side of the table was safe now. I had seen that look before. 3 weeks before the meeting, she invited me to dinner at a steakhouse in Highland Park, the kind of place where the valet knew Robert by name and the menus had no prices because asking would spoil the theater. I thought maybe she wanted to talk about us. The baby. The distance growing between 2 people sleeping in the same bed like polite strangers in a hotel. She wore a soft blue dress and kept touching the necklace I bought her on our 2nd anniversary. For the first 20 minutes, she was almost gentle. She asked if I had been sleeping. She asked if work was stressful. She even reached across the table and covered my hand with hers, and for one foolish second, I let myself believe my wife had come back to me. Then Preston walked in. He was not alone. Robert came behind him, smiling like a man arriving exactly on schedule. That was when I understood dinner was not dinner. It was a setup with linen napkins. Preston slid into the booth and placed a leather folder beside the bread plate. Ashley did not look surprised. She looked prepared. Robert ordered a bourbon before sitting down, then said we all needed to behave like adults. I remember the candle between us flickering against the silverware. I remember the waiter asking if we wanted sparkling or still water while my marriage turned into a negotiation. Preston explained the agreement in that polished legal voice built to make pressure sound like prudence. No one was accusing anyone. No one was pushing me out. They simply wanted clarity, stability, protection before the child arrived. Ashley looked down when he said child, but she did not interrupt. I asked one question. Do I have my own attorney reviewing this? Robert smiled into his glass. You are welcome to hire one, of course. But dragging this out would create unnecessary tension for Ashley. There it was. The baby placed gently on the table like a shield. I looked at my wife. She finally met my eyes and said, please do not make this harder than it needs to be. Not harder for our child. Not harder for us. Harder for them. I folded my napkin, set it beside my plate, and told them I would read it. Robert seemed pleased. Ashley looked relieved. Neither of them knew I had already purchased enough of the company debt to call the lender before dessert arrived. That night, I went home and read every line. The agreement did more than protect inherited assets. It confirmed that Ashley's claims were limited to personal marital property and excluded future ownership interests tied to Whitmore restructuring, recapitalization, or sale. It was clever. Too clever. Preston had written it to stop me from touching anything Robert still believed belonged to him. But because Ashley signed voluntarily, and because she insisted the document apply broadly before the baby arrived, it also separated her from any indirect claim to the entity that would soon control Whitmore manufacturing through Meridian Harbor. They thought they were building a wall around me. They built a wall around themselves. The next morning, Ashley found me in the nursery, reading the agreement in the rocking chair we had not used yet. Sunlight came through the half-hung curtains. She stood in the doorway and asked if I was going to be difficult. I looked at the crib, at the tiny white blanket folded over the rail, and I wanted to ask when she stopped seeing me as the father of her child and started seeing me as a liability. But I knew she would not answer the real question. So I answered hers. No, I said, I will be very careful. Back in the conference room, I watched that sentence become prophecy. Preston reached the clause he had written himself and stopped reading aloud. His silence told the room everything. Ashley leaned toward him. What does that mean? Preston took off his glasses and cleaned them with a cloth he did not need. It means, he said slowly, that the agreement you sign may limit your ability to challenge the controlling structure Mr. Bennett has disclosed. Robert turned on him. You wrote the agreement. Preston did not look at him. Based on the facts you provided. That line landed harder than any accusation. Robert had built the trap with incomplete truth. Ashley had sprung it with a perfect signature. And I had simply waited until the door closed behind them. Preston's words sat in the room like a receipt nobody wanted to sign. Based on the facts you provided. Robert looked at him as if betrayal had finally become inconvenient. Ashley looked at me as if I had changed shape while sitting in the same chair. I had not changed. That was the part none of them understood. I had always been this man. I had always known how to read a balance sheet, follow a liability, trace ownership through a maze of shell companies, and polite lies. The only difference was that they had spent years calling my patience weakness, so when patience finally produced results, it felt like magic to them. I slid the third document across the table. This is the board consent package, I said. It was executed this afternoon after the final voting transfer cleared. The younger board member in the charcoal suit closed his eyes for a second. His name was Daniel Price. He had been the first one to return my call 3 months earlier. Not because he liked me, because he saw the numbers before Robert did. Daniel had 2 children in private school, a mortgage in Preston Hollow, and enough common sense to know loyalty did not cover payroll. He had told me, quietly, that several directors were tired of being shown glossy reports while vendors called their personal phones. He did not want a scandal. Neither did I. Scandals destroy companies from the inside and leave regular workers cleaning up after rich people's pride. So we moved cleanly. No headlines. No threats. Just consent, conversion, transfer, and timing. Robert reached for the board package, but Preston took it first. That small act said more than any speech. The family attorney no longer trusted the family patriarch to handle the paper. Ashley whispered, Daniel? Daniel opened his eyes and looked at the table, not at her. The company needed stability, he said. The word cut through her. Stability had been her favorite weapon, and now it was being used by someone else. I remembered the first time I walked through Whitmore Manufacturing with Robert, for years earlier. He had worn a navy blazer and no safety glasses, even though signs were posted everywhere. Workers stepped aside when he passed, not out of respect exactly, but out of habit. He pointed to machines like they were monuments. Press brakes, laser cutters, assembly lines, trucks rolling out toward Oklahoma, Kansas, Louisiana. This is what real work looks like, he told me. I almost smiled because he had never asked what real work looked like in my life. He thought finance was screens and numbers, soft hands and quiet rooms. He did not understand that a missed covenant could shut down a factory faster than a broken machine. He did not understand that debt has a smell if you know how to breathe around it. Back then, Ashley walked beside us in heels that clicked against the concrete floor. She slipped her arm through mine for the employees to see, and I thought it meant pride. Later, I realized it meant presentation. I was part of the image then. A calm husband. A respectable marriage. A useful accessory to make the Whitmore daughter look grounded. After the tour, Robert took us to dinner and told a story about his father mortgaging everything to keep the first plan alive. I respected that story. I still do. The original Whitmores built something real. Robert inherited the machine and mistook inheritance for immunity. There is a difference between carrying a legacy and wearing it like a crown. Over the last 3 months, I had met the people Robert forgot. The plant manager who delayed his own bonus so hourly workers could get paid before Christmas. The accounts payable clerk who cried on the phone because suppliers were threatening to cut shipments. The retired welder who still owned a tiny block of shares and kept the certificate in a fireproof box with his marriage license. Those people were Whitmore Manufacturing more than Robert ever was. That was why I did not get the company. I did not buy it to punish employees for a family's arrogance. I bought control to keep the doors open and remove the hands that kept steering it toward the ditch. Preston finished reading the board consent and placed it flat on the table. Robert, he said quietly, there is a resolution removing you as chairman pending transition review. Ashley's mother made a soft sound near the window. Robert did not look at her. He looked at me, and for the first time since I had known him, he had no insult ready. I opened the last page and turned it toward him. You are not being erased, I said. You are being audited. His face tightened around the word. Ashley's eyes flashed. You cannot do that to my father. I looked at her signature still resting on the other document, clean and final. No, Ashley, I said. I did not do this to him. I stopped helping everyone pretend he had not already done it to himself. Ashley's words came out sharp enough to make the board members look away. You cannot do that to my father. For a second, all I could hear was the old version of our marriage inside that sentence. Not concern for the company. Not fear for the workers. Not even worry about the child she carried. Just her father, his pride, his chair, his name on the wall behind him. I looked at that wall then, at the brushed steel letters spelling Whitmore Manufacturing above a row of framed awards. The letters caught the evening light and threw it back cold. For years, Robert had used that name like a locked gate. Now the gate was open, and he did not know where to stand. Preston cleared his throat. There will need to be a formal transition meeting, he said. Human resources, compliance, outside counsel, and the lender representatives should be present. Robert turned on him with a look that would have silenced a weaker man. Preston did not blink. That was when I knew the old room was gone. Authority is a strange thing. People think it lives in the loudest voice or the biggest office, but most of the time it lives in whoever everyone starts looking at before they speak. And for the first time since I had entered that family, they were looking at me. I did not enjoy it the way they would have. I did not lean back and savor their fear. Power without restraint is just another kind of poverty, and I had seen enough of that in this room to last a lifetime. I opened a smaller envelope from inside the blue folder and placed 3 pages in front of Ashley. This is not for the company, I said. This is for us. Her face tightened. What is it? A separation proposal. Temporary housing. Medical support. Co-parenting protections. Full prenatal coverage. No public statements. No pressure. No games. Her eyes flicked across the first page, then back to me. You brought divorce papers to this? No, I said. I brought boundaries. The word made her flinch because it was one she had used on me for months. Boundaries when I asked why Robert attended our financial meetings. Boundaries when I asked who drafted the agreement. Boundaries when I asked why my own child's future was being discussed in rooms where I was treated like a visitor. She had loved that word when it protected her secrets. She hated it when it protected me. Robert stepped forward. You will not separate my daughter from this family. I looked at him calmly. Robert, I am not separating her from anyone. I am removing myself from a system that confused family with control. Ashley's mother finally spoke, her voice thin and trembling. Michael, she is pregnant. I turned to her, and my answer was softer than the rest. I know. That is why everything in that proposal protects her care and the baby's stability. I am not punishing my child for adult decisions. Ashley looked down then, not at the company documents, at the pages about us. For the first time all afternoon, she seemed smaller, not because I had made her small, but because the performance had nowhere left to stand. The baby had not been a shield in my papers. The baby had been protected. Ashley had expected anger. Robert had expected surrender. What they got was structure. That unsettled them more than shouting ever could. Daniel Price leaned toward the table. Michael, security is asking whether they should come up. I shook my head once. No, nobody is being marched out. Robert can leave with dignity, or he can stay for the transition briefing with counsel. His choice. Robert stared at me like dignity was an insult when offered by the wrong man. Maybe it was. Maybe the hardest mercy to accept is the one that proves you no longer hold the upper hand. He looked at the chair at the head of the table, the one he had occupied, when I walked in. Then he looked at the folders, the signatures, the witnesses, the daughter who could no longer save him from arithmetic. Slowly, he picked up his phone, his keys, and the leather portfolio he had brought for my humiliation. Ashley whispered, Dad, wait. But Robert did not. He walked to the door without looking at her. At the threshold, he stopped beneath the company logo and turned back to me. For a moment, I thought he might apologize. Pride got there first. You will ruin what my family built, he said. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and kept my voice steady. No, Robert. I am going to find out how much of it is still worth saving. The door closed behind him with a soft click. No slam. No spectacle. Just the sound of an era ending quietly. After Robert left, nobody rushed to fill the silence. The conference room felt larger without him in it, but not lighter. Some people carry weight even after the door closes. Ashley sat frozen in her chair, the separation proposal in front of her, the signed agreement beside it, and the blue folder still open like a book nobody wanted to finish. Her mother stood near the window, one hand pressed to her chest, staring at downtown Dallas as if the skyline might offer instructions. Preston Vale gathered the company documents into a careful stack, not hiding them, not challenging them, just acknowledging that the facts had survived the room. Daniel Price excused the other board members quietly. Chairs moved. Shoes crossed carpet. The old performance dissolved one person at a time until only Ashley, her mother, Preston, Daniel, and I remained. Ashley finally looked at me. Her eyes were red now, but she did not cry. Ashley had always been too proud to cry where pride could still be useful. Was any of it real to you? She asked. The question surprised me, not because it was unfair, but because it was late. Years late. I looked at the ring on my hand, the one I had not removed even that morning. All of it was real to me, I said. That was the problem. Her face changed. A small break, not enough to call regret, but enough to show something human beneath the Whitmore training. I thought you were going to take everything, she whispered. I shook my head. No. I took control of a company that was already being lost. I protected myself from an agreement designed to corner me. And I protected the baby from becoming leverage in a fight adults should have been brave enough to handle without hiding behind a nursery door. That landed where I meant it to. Ashley looked down at her hands. The same hand that had signed with such confidence now rested open on the table, empty. I remembered that hand holding mine in Austin years ago, warm under a restaurant table, her thumb brushing my knuckles while she asked about the small house I grew up in. I remembered believing curiosity was kindness. Maybe it was then. Maybe people do not become strangers overnight. Maybe they just make one small compromise after another until love is buried under family expectations, fear, and the terrible comfort of being told you are better than someone else. Preston stood and said he would coordinate with outside counsel in the morning. Daniel said the transition team would be ready by 8 o'clock. Practical words. Necessary words. The kind of words that help a room start moving after the truth has knocked it still. Ashley's mother walked past me without speaking, then paused at the door. "He loved that company," she said, meaning Robert. I looked at her. Then he should have told it the truth. She had no answer for that. When she left, Ashley and I were alone for the first time all day. The city beyond the glass had turned gold, then copper, then blue. Traffic crawled below us on the streets, tiny headlights beginning their evening migration. Ordinary life kept moving. It always does, even when yours changes shape. Ashley touched the separation proposal. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked. Not cruelly, not dramatically, just tired. "The house is yours for now," I said. "I booked a furnished apartment near the office for myself. Your medical appointments stay covered. The nursery stays exactly as it is. We will work out the rest through counsel." She looked up sharply at the word counsel, but I did not soften it. Some doors need locks after people misuse trust. She nodded once, slowly. "And us?" I let the question breathe. For years, I had answered too quickly, trying to save things before I knew whether they were worth saving. This time, I did not rush. "Us depends on honesty," I said. "Not your father. Not the company. Not a family name. Just honesty. And I have not seen enough of it to make promises tonight." That was the closest I came to anger. She heard it. So did I. I picked up the silver pen she had used earlier and set it beside her signed agreement. Such a small object for so much damage. Ink, metal, pressure, choice. People think life changes in explosions, but most of the time it changes with a signature, a sentence, a silence you finally stop excusing. I gathered my folder and walked to the door. Before leaving, I looked once more at the room where they had planned to reduce me to a footnote. The table was still polished. The logo still shone. The skyline still looked expensive. But the room was different because the lie had left it. Ashley said my name behind me. I stopped but did not turn around. "Did you ever hate me?" she asked. I closed my eyes for a second. There were many answers I could have given. Some would have hurt more. Some would have sounded stronger. I chose the true one. "No," I said. "I just stopped letting love make me stupid." Then I walked out into the hallway, past the glass walls, past the reception desk, past employees who had no idea their company had just been given a chance to survive. The elevator doors opened with a quiet chime. I stepped inside alone. As the doors closed, I looked at my reflection in the steel. Tired eyes, steady hands, wedding ring still there, but no longer heavy. They had wanted one signature to define my place. In the end, her signature did something else. It showed me exactly where I no longer belonged.